Adam,
Yes, sir.
can I interest you in some Dubai chocolate?
Oh, no.
Hello and welcome to Revolutions of Our Time, the podcast where we talk about protests and revolutions, past and present, and try to make sense of it all. With me, as always, is a man who knows all too well what a Dutch police baton feels like. Adam, how are you today?
I'm good. Yeah. Not too bad. It's November, so the darkness has entered our lives pretty permanently, and this time that's not a metaphor. How are you doing?
Yeah, the other darkness is always there for him. Yeah, so listeners, be ready to hear about that darkness and weather for the next 6 months in the UK. But yeah, I'm doing all right. As I mentioned at the top, Dubai chocolate. We'll be talking about the UAE today. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know, Dubai is not the country. Dubai is in the United Arab Emirates. And I thought we should just jump into it today. A football stadium in Manchester, funded by unlimited cash. A hospital in Sudan, used as a cover to smuggle weapons into a genocidal militia. These are not separate stories. They are all facts of a single ruthless project, the rise of the United Arab Emirates as the 21st century imperial power. Today, we trace how a small Gulf monarchy is reshaping the world in its image, and we ask, what, if anything, can we do to stop it?
Wow, that's exciting. I'm here. I feel like I'm on at the start of a fantasy novel almost. That's like some Tolkien setup.
I mean, maybe more like a James Bond one.
Maybe, yeah.
But before we can talk about the UAE, we need to talk about Sudan, because that is what has prompted this episode, is some news that has happened in the past week, and the brutal civil war that's been going on, not just this week, but for the last couple of years. And to understand Sudan, we need to understand a very common fixture in our episodes, which is the ghost of British colonialism.
Of course we do.
I mean, fun fact, well, not fun fact, but fact, both Sudan and the UAE were at one point part of the British Empire at the same time. The turmoil of this really stems from the British Empire and has been kind of ongoing in Sudan since its independence in 1956. Let's start with the map. Mm-hmm. Sudan is a massive country in Northeast Africa.
As I understand, it was prior to the separation of Sudan and South Sudan, it was the largest country in Africa.
Correct. For centuries, Sudan was brutally exploited by different empires, but when the British Empire came into the picture, it ruled alongside Egypt, and it didn't treat Sudan as one nation. They deliberately split it in two, with the Arab-dominated Muslim north and the more ethnically African, Christian, and animist south. And they poured the resources into the north, neglected the south, sowing seeds of division that would lead to decades of civil war and eventually the secession of South Sudan in 2011, which I believe is also going through its own turmoil at the moment. But that's what the legacy of British colonialism typically does if it's not propped up by those powers afterwards as well, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happens when you just draw lines on maps and hope for the best.
Yeah, which was British foreign policy. There's some very straight lines in particularly the north and west of Sudan.
But the most toxic legacy is kind of around some of those straight lines, which is the western region of Darfur. Mm-hmm. The British empowered certain Arab tribes to act as their local enforcers. This was pretty common throughout the British Empire as well. They used Sikh soldiers to pacify a lot of India and even parts of like Malaysia and China, creating a brutal state-backed militia to subjugate the non-Arab African tribes within this region. They created a racial hierarchy and gave one group weapons to rule over the others.
Yeah, so this was British foreign policy under the empire. They would take their colonial holdings, find all the different ethnic groups within an area of land, and pit them against each other such that of all the now warring little powers, Britain was the most powerful. So they might do that by funding a particular group, privileging them with weapons, and then getting their cut. But divide and rule, was and to an extent still is British policy.
Yeah, I was going to say you can kind of see that within most countries today in terms of not racial divides, but economic divides, definitely. Now, fast forward to the late 1990s and early 2000s, the dictator of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, is in power when rebels in Darfur rise up, demanding an end to the marginalization, and al-Bashir reaches for the old colonial playbook. He revives and formalizes those Arab tribal militias, giving them a name. He called them the Janjaweed, which means devils on horseback. Their leader was a man named Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedi, who we will hear about later on. The Janjaweed, backed by the Sudanese government, committed atrocities that shocked the world: mass killings, rapes, burning of villages. It was the first Darfur genocide, as it's known in a lot of academic circles. The International Criminal Court indicted al-Bashir for war crimes and genocide. And if you're curious, why did he get indicted and not other genocidal maniacs? Well, he didn't have the US and Britain in his corner, right? But here's the twist to our story here. To control the Janjaweed he had unleashed, al-Bashir officially made them a part of the state in 2013, transforming them into the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF for short. He gave Hemedi a uniform and a title. Imagine a government taking a violent street gang and turning it into an official police unit. This was essentially what was happening here.
Yeah, it's basically what happened in Nazi Germany. Like the Sturmabteilung were like thugs, basically beat up communists and Jews, and they became the SS, the like official sort of secret police of Nazi Germany.
Yeah, and in this situation, you have two rival armies because he didn't incorporate them into the traditional Sudanese armed forces. He kept them separate. But the RSF now were growing very rich by controlling gold mines and smuggling routes out of the country, which exists still to this day, maybe to a specific Gulf nation we'll talk about. This fragile, toxic balance held until 2019, when a pro-democracy revolution overthrew al-Bashir, and maybe we'll talk about it one day. But for a moment, there was hope. But the two armies, the regular military and the RSF, staged a coup in 2021, crushing that democratic dream. They agreed to share power, but it was a marriage of convenience between two heavily armed rivals, and they did not trust each other at all. This tension only lasted a few years because it exploded in April 2023. This was triggered by a dispute over how to integrate the RSF into the regular army. In essence, it was a fight over which general would be the top. And so the two forces turned the capital, Khartoum, and the entire Darfur region into a battlefield. That's been waging ever since, as we record this in November 2025. And that brings us to this week in the city of El Fasher. For over 500 days, this city was the last army stronghold in Darfur, and a place of refuge for hundreds of thousands of people already displaced by the RSF's violence. And it was under a vicious siege, walled by earthen berms, and the people were trapped without food. A week ago today, the RSF captured it, and what followed wasn't just a military victory, it was a slaughter of innocents. The UN has condemned these as, quote, mass killings and summary executions. They say the city has, quote, descended into an even darker hell than it already was under siege. I don't know if you've seen anything out of this week, Adam.
That report, basically, headlines about it, and that the RSF is, I don't know if this is a credible accusation at the ICJ, but certainly colloquially are being accused of a genocide. Yeah,
so these claims come from satellite imagery, actually, and this is the first I've heard of satellite imagery being used so quickly to unveil political action. I guess you could call it political, but satellite imagery from Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab shows, quote, large blood stains covering the ground. And I've seen these pictures. It's really wild that this is human blood seen from space in areas where the RSF are reported to have shot residents of the city. And analysts see objects 1.3 to 2 meters long, which is about the length of a human body. They've seen these across the city, including a pile against a wall at the Al Saudi hospital. The Sudan Doctors Network reports the RSF, quote, cold-bloodedly killed everyone they found inside Al Saudi hospital, including patients and their companions. Survivors describe a city of horrors. One woman, Fatima Abdulrahman, told Al Jazeera, quote, "Shelling killed my daughter, injured my other daughter's eye, and paralyzed my son. My body is full of wounds and is swollen." And for reference, they're estimating tens of thousands having potentially been killed over a 2-day window, which adds to the 150,000 total dead in this civil war, with about 12 million displaced. Sudan's ambassador to the UN, as you said, called this, quote, "a genocide by all legal standards." I think what I'm pointing out here is that this isn't like a random civil war as it's kind of pointed to in the news. I don't see any ties to outside forces talked about when this is discussed in the news anywhere really in the West. And one thing that's interesting in my findings is Al Jazeera has been a pretty reliable source for Palestine coverage, as you know, but they fall into the same trappings that every news station has, right? There are no ties to the Gulf in any Al Jazeera reportings.
That is interesting because Al Jazeera, I used to work for a company that had all of its main offices in Africa. Not its headquarters. Its headquarters was actually in the UAE. The biggest offices were all in Africa, and people swore by Al Jazeera because it was the best news outlet, or at least mainstream Western-facing news outlet for news of Africa in general.
My first time noting their bias was when I was looking up stories about the World Cup in Qatar.
Of course.
And there was nothing bad about it whatsoever, obviously.
In case the listener may not know, Al Jazeera is owned by the government of Qatar, but has supposed editorial independence, similar to the BBC in the UK, I suppose.
Sure. Very similar to the BBC in the UK. But yeah, so this is not just a random civil war that happened out of nowhere. This is a culmination of a long-planned campaign by an allegedly genocidal militia, born from the ashes of colonialism and nurtured by the dictators of the past. And now it's off its leash, basically. Let's move on in our story. We have the RSF, a genocidal militia with roots in colonialism. The immediate question is how? How does a paramilitary group afford this war? You know, they're in this Sahara desert. They don't have the resources to wage this. How does it get drones, armored vehicles, and a constant supply of bullets? Any guesses, Adam?
Is it to do with the United Arab Emirates?
Well, Adam, the answer does not lie in the deserts of Darfur, but over 1,000 miles away in the air-conditioned palaces of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. You are correct. It is UAE.
Do you know the difference between people from Dubai and people from Abu Dhabi?
Go on.
People from Dubai don't watch the Flintstones, but people from Abu Dhabi do.
Okay.
Moment of levity. It's my only UAE joke.
I'm keeping that in. I knew exactly where that was going. Yeah. Specifically, it goes back to that Flintstone watching city, Abu Dhabi. And to understand why, we need to talk about a man named Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan. In the West, he's colloquially known as Sheikh Mansour. Have you ever heard this name before?
Yes, I have.
What context?
A family friend was his personal chef.
Oh my God. What year? I don't want to be complicit.
To be fair, I don't know. I actually don't know whether it was him. I looked him up because he worked for Emirati royalty in Abu Dhabi, but I don't know whether it was the Sheikh personally or one of his family members.
Was this someone you know from Switzerland?
The uncle of someone that I know from Switzerland. Yeah, we also knew. He sadly died a couple of years ago, quite young, but I think from like 2017-ish to 2022-ish when he passed away, 2023.
I mean, the metaphor of Zurich being paved with Nazi gold still is apt today, I believe.
Yes, though not a Swiss man himself.
Anyway, enough slagging off of Switzerland. So this man is actually very, very well known in the West. And the reason he's known, you did not allude to, and that is he's known as the reclusive, ultra-rich owner of Manchester City Football Club. I don't know if you knew this, but he's very involved in that club. He essentially makes the decisions on their transfers and on all the big club decisions. He's the man who turned them from a struggling team that bounced around League One, Championship, up to a global powerhouse winning, the Premier League, Champions League. He's the symbol of Emirati luxury and soft power.
It's fascinating because it seems to me that, when you reach a certain level of wealth, when you've got a Patek Philippe watch and you've got a yacht and you've got a fleet of supercars, the only thing left to buy is an English football club.
The only thing left to buy is people's hearts. They want to buy influence.
Yeah.
I would know. My football club is owned by Stan Kroenke, member of the Walton family.
My club is owned by a holding company. Anyway.
This public persona of Sheikh Mansour is a carefully constructed facade. However, based on interviews that the New York Times, as well as a few other newspapers have conducted with American, African, and Arab officials, Sheikh Mansour has another much darker portfolio than just a football club or an empire of football clubs, as they have bought like 11 football teams around the world, basically. He is what officials call the handler or the fixer of the UAE. And the UAE is not... They are an association of kingdoms, essentially. That's why it's called the United Arab Emirates. It's ruled by a council of family cartel members, essentially. Each one rules their little emirate. And he is from the cartel family from Abu Dhabi. He's the third most powerful member of that cartel. His brother is basically like the king president of that city. His role is to manage the whole country's relationships with what one former U.S. official called, quote, unseemly and unsightly yet important strongmen. And that's him personally.
Okay.
And his most important project for years has been the RSF's leader, Hamedi, which I find quite interesting. That is like his to-do list today is like, give Erling Haaland a 10-year extension and then at 1 o'clock meet with a warlord. Like, give Pep notes on the formation. If time, in brackets. Now, if this sounds like something out of like a James Bond novel, I mean, it kind of is, right?
Yeah.
But it also echoes a very old playbook, the use of proxy forces to wage wars of empire. He's kind of learning from the empire that held the Emirates for centuries. Which, by the way, like, do you know the history of the Emirates? What it was before basically the 70s or 80s?
It was basically a collection of fishing villages that were located in strategically important places for controlling the flow of resources out of the Strait of
Hormuz.
Hormuz?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. The fact that this sprung up into what it is now is pretty baffling, but shows that the results of that imperial backing do benefit immensely in global politics over the last 50 years. Mm. And the relationship between the UAE and Hamedi back in Sudan wasn't born in this current war. It was forged in the fires of another conflict, the war in Yemen, when the UAE needed reliable ground troops to fight alongside their own sophisticated forces. Who did they call? They called Hamedi and his goons, basically. The former dictator, Omar al-Bashir, sent the RSF to fight as the UAE's mercenaries, in part because he was paid, in part to keep them in fighting shape, essentially. For years, these men fought and died for the Emirates, and a bond of loyalty and total financial dependency was cemented. But the real turning point, the moment this shifted from a partnership to a joint operation, came just weeks before the Sudan war even began. In February 2023, as tensions between the RSF and the Sudanese army were reaching boiling points, Sheikh Mansour welcomed Hamedi to his Persian Gulf palace in Abu Dhabi. This wasn't a secret meeting, it was an open display of alliance, and they were coordinating there. And when the conflict exploded in April of 2023, the UAE's support became the RSF's lifeline. But they were sophisticated about it. They established a ruthless, two-tiered system of support. So the first is the diplomatic shield. The UAE gave Hamedi something just as valuable as weapons, political cover, which is why no one's talked about this relationship much. When his forces were committing atrocities, he was given sanctuary in Abu Dhabi. He recorded video speeches from a protected villa there. And crucially, as reported by Middle East Eye, when the U.S. tried to broker a ceasefire to save El Fasher, the UAE, quote, refused to address the situation at all, ensuring the RSF's final brutal offensive could proceed without diplomatic interference. So even the U.S.'s interests were vetoed by the UAE in this regard, showing who really holds the cards in this sphere of the world on this part of the map. Does that surprise you at all?
That the UAE was able to block American interests in that area?
Yeah.
A bit, yeah. I suppose it's a matter of sort of scale of importance for the US, right? Like if they really wanted to, could have interfered more firmly, but I suppose but no, that does surprise me a little bit that the UAE was that the US would accept that. I suppose on an individual level, perhaps there are some connections between powerful people in the UAE and powerful people in the United States.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the second system of support was the covert weapons pipeline, and this is where the operation reveals its true cynicism, I suppose. The UAE set up a field hospital in eastern Chad, run by charities that Sheikh Mansour himself controls. On the surface, a humanitarian mission. This is what was the official report out to the UN and places like that. But beneath that, according to American and UN officials, it was the central hub for a secret effort to smuggle drones and other powerful weapons to the RSF. I guess as someone who's viewed international aid from different standpoints in time, does this surprise you at all? Or is that something that's kind of done in this part of the world, sadly?
It's not something I'm an expert in. I know that it has happened for sure. Far more common is that the excuse of smuggling weapons is used as a weapon of war to deny aid from entering a country. Does it surprise me? Not particularly, but it is disappointing. It is a shame because international development is so often an excuse for sort of neo-colonial extraction. That for sure happens a lot, and I would say is maybe the dominant model of international development money when it comes to Western powers. When I would apply for grants in the area of international development, that would be quite explicit. The US would have a clause in their contract saying, we won't fund any project that might affect US exports of X, Y, Z. The Danish government said exactly the same thing, and other governments meant that, but might not say it explicitly. Mm-hmm. But aid, a response to some disaster, some calamity, I do think is necessary and has value. And so it is a shame to see that weaponized in this way.
Especially in that region, which receives so little and has been exploited so much, right?
Mm.
And the weapons themselves that were being shipped into Sudan tell a story of global complicity. As The Guardian reported, on the battlefields of Sudan, you can find British-made engines for armored personnel carriers and UK-manufactured small arms target systems, as well as a lot of American guns. The UK sells this equipment to the UAE, and the UAE then diverts it to the RSF. I know that those partnerships are quite lucrative between the UAE and Western countries in terms of weapon sales, but some of them are being diverted, as we see. And it's a deadly supply chain of impunity. The Western governments are fully aware that the weapons they ship to the UAE are not necessarily staying there, but they choose to look the other way. So when we look at these satellite images from Yale, the bloodstains in El Fasher, the bodies piled up, we're not just looking at the work of the RSF. We're looking at a direct, calculated outcome of a long-term partnership. We're looking at the work of the handler, as he's known, and his most valuable asset. And this isn't just a conflict, it's a proxy war for regional dominance, and the people of Sudan are paying a hefty price for it. Now, we've talked about local proxy forces being used to wage wars.
Mm-hmm.
How does this compare to the classic colonial playbook of the British East India or the Scramble for Africa? And is this just colonialism with the 21st century upgrade to it? And what does this tell us about their view of the international community and that they believe they can get away with all of this?
Well, let me ask a clarifying question first. You mentioned that this is a proxy conflict and that the UAE is funding the RSF and supplying them with weapons and such. Who is the other side of this proxy? Of this conflict, rather?
Sudan's established junta, basically.
Sure.
So there's no good guy versus bad guy situation. And I think the highlight of the story more is that execution of civilians and the subjugation of ethnic minorities, rather than there's one person fighting for freedom, one person not, right?
Well, then, to address your question, I think that this is pretty standard. I don't even think you have to go back to the colonial era to see this. I remember seeing a news report from maybe 10 years ago, which pointed out that in, I think it was Syria, there were CIA-funded militant groups fighting like...
Russian backed?
No, it wasn't even that. It was like Pentagon-backed militant groups, like different... Wow. Agencies funded, but like militant groups funded by different US agencies were fighting each other.
Well, have you seen Narcos?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
I mean, that's like DEA versus CIA, which happened a lot in Latin America.
Oh yeah. So I don't think there's anything particularly unusual about powers funding different groups and using proxy forces out there. There was the instance of across India and sort of Central Asia, South and Central Asia, the conflict between like Britain and Russia in particular for colonial dominance there was called the Great Game, right? Like they thought of it as a sort of like gentleman sort of a spot of conquest, see who's top nation and all that.
Risk in real life, basically.
Risk in real life, and the scramble for Africa was similar. European countries met in Berlin in 1880, the 1880s, without a single African representative there, and carved up Africa between them. And it's very interesting to look and see what different countries wanted and what they got. And one of the things that I found out quite recently about that, because I was wondering how Belgium, and specifically King Leopold, maybe, and this is a big claim, but perhaps the single most evil person in all of history, King Leopold II of Belgium, how he ended up with the Congo. And it was basically so that Britain, France, and Germany wouldn't get it.
Same reason he ended up with the EU headquarters, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, basically.
When in doubt, disappoint everyone by giving it to Belgium.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that history has taught us. And so yeah, I think that is... What's the saying? I'm sure we said it on this podcast before, but history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Absolutely.
And so I think there is an element of rhyming. The modus operandi might be the same. It's different, of course, in how open countries are about it. Like the UAE isn't boasting we're colonizing Sudan, but they like the money that comes from it. I presume. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure what their gain out of it is, but I have a suspicion.
We'll get into it. A not so fun fact about the Berlin Conference, which was the scramble for Africa, is that while Africa was not represented at the table, Japan was somehow there as an observer state, and it's because they just happened to be in town for a tour. And it could be said that maybe what they've witnessed and the discussions they saw there influenced their policy-making decisions in future, if anything, not to defend the Empire of Japan at all, but the thought of, well, if we don't get to these first, they will. Anyway, so we've established the what, these atrocities in Sudan. We've established the who, which is the UAE, and specifically Sheikh Mansour as the handler for this all. Now we need to understand the why. Why is the UAE doing this? And this is what I think. And the answer requires us to go back for a moment to a moment of profound hope that the UAE saw as a direct threat. Do you have any guess what that could be?
A moment the UAE saw as direct threat.
Last 15 years, 20 years?
In the last 15 years. The Arab Spring?
Correct. Yes, this was... I believe this traces back to the Arab Spring. And for those of us that don't remember, the Arab Spring was a wave of massive pro-democracy, anti-government protests and uprisings that swept across the Middle East and North Africa starting in 2011. It toppled dictators in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen. For millions, this was a moment of incredible possibility, a cry of freedom and self-determination. Though I will say that the politics that have happened as a result, the bounce back of sort of the imperial powers, have kind of squandered this hope a bit. That same politics class I took in my master's course ended with the Arab Spring as like a hopeful note. That was the last week And then my year, which was 2021, they scrapped it, the last chapter, because they're like, yeah, this didn't go as we thought it would go. So we're going to talk about something else. But for the absolute monarchies of the Gulf, especially the UAE, the Arab Spring was their worst nightmare. The sight of people power toppling entrenched rulers was existentially terrifying. They saw the rise of political Islam, like the Muslim Brotherhood, as a direct challenge to their own model of autocratic control. So they made a strategic decision. They would become the architects of the counter-revolution. Their plan was, I think, as calculated as it was ruthless. They realized that the United States and Europe, after the Iraq War, were often reluctant to get their hands dirty with direct military intervention. So they realized no one would come to their aid, even if they were nominal allies, if the people did rise up against them. So the UAE decided it would position itself as the indispensable partner that would do the messy work for America and for Britain. They would fight the brutal on-the-ground battles that the West couldn't or wouldn't, and in return, they'd get a free hand to reshape the region. So let's look at this playbook in action, because Sudan is not their first foray into this. Mm-hmm. Egypt, 2013, when the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood government took power after the revolution, the UAE bankrolled its overthrow. They funded and orchestrated a massive astroturfing campaign called Tamarad, which means rebellion in Arabic. It created the illusion of a popular grassroots movement demanding the military step in. And once the military coup happened, the UAE, along with Saudi Arabia, immediately flooded the new dictatorship of General Sisi with billions of dollars, crushing the Arab Spring's most important achievement. Did you know any of this about Tamarad?
I didn't, no. No, I had no idea.
I didn't before my research into this week.
Interesting.
Libya, after the fall of Gaddafi, the UAE chose its strongmen, specifically renegade General Khalifa Haftar, who currently rules like the eastern half of the country. For years, they have violated a UN arms embargo to flood Haftar's forces with weapons, drones, and even Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group. That was all facilitated by the UAE. Their goal was to ensure a friendly warlord takes control and prevents a unified democratic Libyan state from ever forming. It's worth noting that the eastern half of Libya is one with the most oil reserves, of which the UAE has full control at the moment. It also turns a blind eye to the slave trade that is going on in that part of the country as well. Some of those slaves have reportedly ended up in places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and in Yemen starting in 2015. As a part of the Saudi-led coalition, the UAE has pursued its own agenda. They've trained and funded dozens of local militias to create a patchwork of proxy forces. Most tellingly, they've militarily occupied the island of Socotra. Do you know about this?
I do. Actually, this is the only Emirati military intervention that I did really know about.
I knew you'd know about this. They've got some cool trees I thought you'd like.
They got some cool trees on Socotra. Yeah. I was looking at going to this island. It's not that close to Yemen. It's kind of like halfway between Yemen and Somalia.
Yeah.
And it is the piece of land that has been geologically stable and isolated for the longest on Earth. So they have some really cool flora and fauna there. And I was looking at how one goes there, given the ongoing conflict in Yemen, and there are twice weekly flights from Abu Dhabi.
Yep. I mean, it's worth noting that against the will of the local population there, the UAE has built multiple runways over this delicate ecosystem, as well as several military bases. So, yeah, I mean, the human cost of this project has been pretty staggering. Precise numbers are impossible to tell, but the wars that the UAE has significantly fueled have resulted in over 500,000 deaths. In Yemen, it's roughly 350,000 dead, Sudan over 150,000, and thousands more in Libya, along with their open slave markets. I mean, this kind of reflects the scale of their ambition. They want to control the Horn of Africa, the Red Sea, and strategic points in North Africa, and to ensure that every government is run by a dictator who will crush popular movements and hand over their resources to the UAE. The big question here is, how do you protest an empire that's designed to be invisible?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's not. It's even less obvious of what to do in this case than it is with the the big and obvious empires. The Emirates is such a strange place, and the like grip it has over the popular imagination is also very strange.
We'll get into that, but I do feel it has a much stronger grip on the imagination of Northern Europe in particular, and maybe it's just like this season you're going into where it's going to be dark and rainy. They just picture the sun and they can ignore everything else, right?
I think that's a huge part of it, and pretty low cost flights to Dubai in particular.
Well, we'll get into really why.
People. Yeah, right.
What airline is that?
Yeah.
But I mean, going back to that question, like, is there anything that can be done against an invisible empire?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, but it'll be harder, right? Because I think first have to do something hopefully akin to what we're doing here, which is to make people aware of it, and then more strategies can emerge around boycotting, around political campaigns, protests, the bread and butter that we talk about here.
How do you attack the imagination that people have built about this place?
I think you see it a little bit already, certainly in some of the online spaces that I occupy, although I developed this belief years ago from my own first-hand experience of the Emirates, which is that Dubai is cringe. Like, Dubai is a horrible place. It's one of the... I went there by accident. I was supposed to have a layover.
Adam. I did not know you've been to Dubai. Before we get into the luxury aspects of this, tell us about your time in Dubai. This segues neatly into the next bit. It's the last place I thought you'd ever end up.
Well, I didn't go on purpose. It was an accident. I had a layover there, and it was supposed to be for 4 hours, but the travel company booked the connecting flight 4 hours later the next day by mistake. So it was supposed to be like a 4-hour layover, but it was a 28-hour layover. So I spent 1 day in Dubai.
Tell us about this 24 hours in hell.
It was crazy. It was insane. We went to this hotel that they put us up at. It's nearly 50 degrees, right? Like
Celsius.
In this hotel, Celsius, yes. Which in Fahrenheit is what, like 120 or something like that.
Yeah, something hot.
And I spent some time in the pool of this hotel, which was like really warm water because it was 50 degrees. But then the moment you go in anywhere, you're freezing cold because the AC is blasted up so high. And then all the big fancy buildings they've got are weirdly spaced out. Like it's like there is a highway between everywhere you want to go. And there is a subway system. And we went on the subway system and we went to the Mall of Dubai to get...
is this the one with a mountain in it that you can ski?
Yeah,
or is that it?
So that is the mall. I did not see this mountain because the mall was so big I couldn't find it. What I did see, I think they have a roller coaster in there somewhere as well. I saw a 4-story fish tank that had sharks in it that you could learn to scuba dive in.
Isn't there also that giant pool in one of those malls that goes... You learn to scuba dive in that it's more than 4 stories. It's like very deep.
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't know about that.
Okay.
But what I did see there, I wandered around the store and then I found one corner that was empty, right? It was like completely empty. The stores that were there were like Versace, Louis Vuitton, Hermes, kids. It was all kids' clothes for these like super luxury brands.
Yeah.
And then when we did get a meal, it was like I've not even seen this like in the US. The waiter would replace my drink when it was like it was still like a third full, and they just put a new one down on the table. It was like there was a lot of drink that wasn't being drunk that they would just carry away. I'm like, hey, that's then they'd be gone doing something else. It feels inauthentic in a way that I have not experienced anywhere else on Earth.
Yeah.
Even like somewhere like Disneyland feels more authentic because in Disneyland you're in a theme park, right? Dubai tries to present itself as though that's not what it is, but it's uncanny. It is uncanny being there, and
we've spoken about Las Vegas before, and I think it does draw some comparisons to Dubai, especially the climate. But I think Vegas unapologetically views itself as a theme park.
Right, yeah.
I don't think it's pretending it's a cultural hub of anything other than that culture specifically. Mm-hmm. Whereas it feels like Dubai wants to take itself a lot more seriously than that. Mm. We'll get into it. So this raises a critical question. All of what we've talked about, how does a state built on such violence present itself to the world, right? We've heard Adam's firsthand account of being there. And the answer is through a meticulously crafted campaign of reputation laundering, a strategy that uses our own desires for glamour, sport, and innovation against us. To understand this, we need to look at a pivotal moment for the UAE, and this was in 2006. That year, a company owned by the UAE government tried to buy a series of major seaports in the United States. The deal was blocked by a massive political backlash over national security concerns. For the Emirati leadership, this was a profound shock and humiliation. They realized that raw money and oil weren't enough to buy global acceptance. They needed to rebrand. And I would say one instance of showing that this was successful is that somehow every parking meter in Chicago has come to be owned by the Emirates.
Interesting.
Among some other cities. So the city of Chicago can't actually add infrastructure without the permission of Abu Dhabi. Which is insane to me. Yeah. Now, their solution was to become not just a power, but a brand. You mentioned those brands you saw in Dubai, and I think like the brand of the Emirates is no different. And they want it to be a brand that's not associated with war and warlords, but with excellence and luxury and the future. One example as well is sports washing, which I think Adam and I have spoken about a lot off the podcast in our time as friends, but maybe we'll do some episodes about that in future, especially as the World Cup is coming up next year. But this uses the universal appeal of sports to clean a stained reputation. Obviously, the crown jewel of this project has been Manchester City. When Sheikh Mansour bought the team in 2008, as I mentioned before, it was a middle-of-the-road club. And he then spent over $3.5 billion on the world's best players, managers, and facilities, transforming it into the global powerhouse it is today. The message was clear. The UAE is a winner. It's sophisticated. It's part of your community. There's a permanent banner in Manchester on the way to the stadium that says, Sheikh Mansour, Manchester thanks you. The emotional connection is the entire point of this. It creates a psychological barrier against believing that a state is capable of what it's doing. But the rebrand doesn't stop at football. It's a multi-pronged assault on our perception. I mean, you mentioned that everything feels fake. I would call that like the luxury mirage. As you said, the buildings there's a highway in between each one, but from afar, it looks like a nice skyline, right?
Sure, yeah. And got the tallest building in the world, right? Like that's a level of prestige there.
No sewage connected to it though, right? Like they have poop trucks that come in every day.
I can't remember if it's that one or another mega tall tower. But
I think it's the Burj Khalifa. I mean, they've got like artificial islands. Did you see those?
Yeah, and most of them don't work. Like no one could build anything on them.
I mean, they've got 7-star hotels. Dubai is structured as a playground for the global elite. The message is one of futuristic glamour, distracting from the medieval violence that it funds. When you see an Instagram model promoting Dubai chocolate or a crypto influencer touting the city's tax-free crypto oasis that it is, they're often unknowingly, most of the time not caring either way, even if they did know, acting as foot soldiers in this campaign.
Dubai chocolate in particular is one that baffles me a little bit. I've never actually had it. I imagine it's fine. I like pistachio. I like chocolate, so I'm sure it's fine. But it strikes me as something that was so obviously created by a marketing team.
Yeah.
Like, I'd never heard of it, and then suddenly it was everywhere, and people seem to be really into it. I'm like, or at least tourist shops advertised selling it in a pretty intense way.
It hit California really fast and hard.
Same in Amsterdam, but that might have been where I was walking around as a tour guide, which was the most central bit. But I was just like, guys, this clearly was created by a marketing team. And I guess, If it wasn't, it wasn't. For most people, that's irrelevant, right?
Yeah, I rolled my eyes at there's a fast food place that is in San Diego, and it's across Southern California, but it's like a locally owned one called Plant Power, and it's all vegan. Each month they have like a different like milkshake flavor, and one month recently they had Dubai chocolate, and I was like, doesn't this go against your ethos? You know, you're saving the planet, and now it's like flavor of the month, Dubai chocolate. But the other way that they have been promoting themselves is being the capital of capital. UAE now bills itself as a global hub for finance, AI, and ironically green technology. Sheikh Mansour's $300 billion sovereign wealth fund, Mubadala, invested in Silicon Valley and beyond. The goal is to make UAE's money so deeply embedded into the global economy that it becomes too untouchable, too important to sanction, and too connected to criticize.
Green technology, that does seem ironic, but they hosted COP28 in 2023, Conference of Parties, the same organization that brought the Paris Accord, which for me was probably when they lost the remaining shreds of their credibility. But yeah, a lot of people from my work were like, "Oh, you're going to Dubai to talk about the climate." And that was a big multinational corporation that was also headquartered in Dubai.
Well, I mean, a side note, I mentioned the gold mines in Sudan. This gold is smuggled to the UAE where it's refined and enters the global market.
I thought this might be UAE's interest. As a financial commodity, but also as a sort of luxury item. It's popular, certainly in Dubai.
I think Sudan has a lot of resources in general. They have oil, they have different types of mineral resources, so there's a lot to be invested in around there. Yeah, CNN, they've done a detailed report about how this gold trade is built on slave labor, including the enslavement of children in these mines. Officially, no one works in these mines. In Sudan or from the UAE, there is no report of anyone working in these mines. Yet the gold just magically flows out of it. A lot of the gold in the world market comes from this source, basically. There's a conscious duality. In Sudan, Libya, and Yemen, the UAE projects hard power through its bullets and bombs. In London, New York, and on social media, it projects soft power through sports, through skyscrapers, stock portfolios. But one funds the other, and both are designed to make you look the other way.
Yeah, they had a big boost during COVID because it was one of the few places where you could go to be fairly free of COVID restrictions during lockdown.
Yeah. They seem to have found their niche in the Western social media landscape in that like far-right crypto bros and like the bikini models and like the gym bros, like they all got good stuff to say about Dubai, right? We kind of discussed this. I had a question about like how do we break through this facade? In short, like how do we do this? Is it just education? Is it just pushing another narrative? Or I mean, this is all coming from an American talking to like a Brit, like our countries have had our fair share of this as well. Not only in the colonial aspect, but also in the soft power aspect too. So like, who are we to sit here and criticize? I mean, I think we still have a credence to do so, but do you want to chime in on that?
In terms of who we are to criticize, I think it's probably our duty to, in some way, being in the heart of empire, the imperial core, as we say. We have made a point of learning how to recognize these patterns throughout our own nations, and well, I think we acknowledge those pretty often, and indeed have several times throughout this episode. That doesn't mean we shouldn't also point it out when the same methods are happening elsewhere. And in terms of pushing back in terms of narrative, as I say, I think probably the most effective at the start is to make it a bit cringe, like to point out I think that one of the things that fascinates me about Dubai in a way is that its rise has coincided with at least explicit desire that people seem to have for authenticity, right? Like there is a tension in our society between the inauthentic and the authentic. Like we're surrounded by social media that we know to be inauthentic, but everyone says what will help the social media account grow is a feeling of authenticity. And Dubai is the least authentic place I've ever been. And I think that if people maybe start to feel that a bit more, then it loses some of its appeal. There will always be people who are drawn to that, right? Like if you have a certain amount of money and you want a lifestyle that is above all else comfortable, then Dubai is probably a great fit for you. But it puts me in mind of the people in the spaceship in WALL-E a little bit.
One thing that was a shock for me when I moved to Hong Kong was the culture of live-in helpers from like the Philippines and Indonesia. And I think that is becoming less popular than it was very slowly in Hong Kong and Singapore. But one place I know that has gained traction and laws have been newly implemented to allow for Filipinos and Indonesians to move there and become live-in servants essentially is the Emirates. Like that's a huge destination for that. And even Westerners that have apartments there have these live-in servants basically. So it's just the culture there, I mean, is so contrary to like, I mean, maybe that's why people do move there. Maybe they find themselves resonating with that sociopathic-ness and they want to leave somewhere like the West. We're talking specifically about the Emirates here. This could apply not necessarily in the geopolitical aspirations, but sort of the lifestyle and everything applies to a lot of the other Gulf nations. And when we're talking about authenticity, one that we've discussed before on this podcast that stands out as being authentic is Oman, which is probably the only place we would like to visit of those Gulf nations. And it's because they've used their oil money to preserve culture and not just make this a playground of the West rich, you know?
Yeah, Oman looks very beautiful.
Yeah. When you see Dubai, there's nothing authentic about those skyscrapers, right? Nothing authentic to the culture of the place it's in historically, right? It's just taking inspiration from places like New York or Las Vegas even, or, you know, just these random assortments of Western influence and maybe even some inspiration of like what an East Asian rich person might want in their capital hub.
Yeah. Although it is worth pointing out that I think this is especially true of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, the richest of the Emirates. I don't think it is true of all the Emirates.
True. No, that's true.
Fujairah, I think, has more a traditional architecture and
true. Also, not really welcoming of tourists. A lot of those.
No, not as much for sure. And tourists will have less fun there because you can't like drink and whatnot in a lot of these other Emirates. And actually, just as an aside, in Dubai, they do have an area that I believe is called the Old Souk, which is traditional style architecture. It's where actual Emiratis hang out. But even that was built in like the 90s. Like it's not. Yeah. It's called the Old Souk, but it's not.
It's old for Dubai.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, when I hear critiques of Dubai, like one that does make me a little disappointed as a fan of like culture and history and stuff is they had all this money to do whatever they wanted. Like, why couldn't they have made it like a really cool, have it be futuristic if you want, version of like what that is like in the Arabic world, not just a copy of Western ideals and what the West has done with their cities, right?
Yeah.
Could be a lot cooler of a place to be.
Yeah.
Anyway. We walked through the horrific reality in Sudan. We followed the trail to the UAE's royal family, understood their counter-revolutionary project, and seen through this facade. This brings us to the most important question, which is, what can we as individuals possibly do against a state with unlimited cash? The answer isn't great, but it's that we must target two things that their empire relies on, and it's economic revenue and its international legitimacy. Definitely a boycott is the most powerful tool to do both. And I say that it's not necessarily a great answer because it will be very hard to get mass support for an Emirati boycott.
Yes.
If anything, due to the intertangled economics between them and the West at this point. But I want to touch on that a little bit. I mean, boycotts are all about applying collective targeted pressure. And as we mentioned, they want to be a brand. So we need to hit that brand and the brands that have stemmed from the Emirates. Their economy has shifted from oil to be heavily reliant on tourism, aviation, and its global reputation. We can boycott their core commercial asset. They are big in the aviation space. Emirates airline is their flagship carrier and often seen as one of the best airlines to fly on due to the luxury. When you see the word Emirates, they want you to think of luxury travel, not anything else.
And I mean, for what it's worth, that has been very effective, partly because it is genuinely, I've only been on it, I think, once, maybe twice, but it is lovely. Like, it's very nice. It's a very nice experience. I understand they've been very successful with this one in particular.
Yeah. They also have Etihad Airways, which is a competitor on paper to the Emirates.
Etihad is also supposed to be quite posh, but I've not been on it, I think.
Now, the difference is Emirates is based in Dubai, Etihad is based in Abu Dhabi, and it's directly owned by the state. There's also Air Arabia, which is a low-cost carrier based in Sharjah, though I think that one is seen less often in Europe. They own a lot of spaces in the tourism and hospitality sector. There's the Jumeirah Group, which owns a lot of luxury hotel chains around the world. A lot of them seem very posh, like if there's somewhere called Jumeirah, some location. I've never heard of it because I'm not posh, but maybe you, being in Swiss circles, know people that have stayed at Jumeirah properties. I don't know.
I think I only know the one. Isn't that like the 7-star hotel is a Jumeirah property?
That is, but they've branched out and they now have Jumeirah hotels in several countries. There's also MR Properties, which they're the real estate agent behind the Burj Khalifa and the Dubai Mall. They've branched out to be very invested around the world, especially in commercial real estate and in luxury apartments. So something to look out for if you're in search of a new apartment or in that realm is to look for MR. And it's just kind of being aware of when you are interacting with the global economy, look out for that sovereign wealth fund, right? Mubadala and Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, they own stakes in hundreds of companies globally, from semiconductors to private equity. And we can't really boycott them all, especially since they're so hidden behind those funds. But we can target their high-profile consumer-facing investments. One of those being Global Foundries microchip company. So if you are looking to invest in building a computer or anything like that, you can look at if those chips come from there. But I think the more important part that we've talked about, because boycotting their, Dubai chocolate or whatever isn't going to ruin the Emirates, right? Or not flying on their planes. But I think hitting the reputation is more important. It's kind of acknowledging and rejecting the idea of sports washing that gives the UAE like a pass in the people's imagination. Their investments in football are numerous. They own like 11 teams in the City football group, which they've then used like, just from a competitive standpoint, they basically use these teams as like a minor league for Man City, which then if a player is good at Girona or some of the other, like Melbourne City or New York City FC, they just sell them to Man City for cheap. And don't sell them to other people. Or like the pipeline has typically been players, develop at one of their teams in like Spain or Portugal or Germany or Austria, then get sent to Man City if they're really good. Then they retire in New York City in the MLS with a really fat contract they don't deserve. But they also just have too many sponsorships to list involved in this. This one hits close to home and hurts my heart a lot, obviously, because I'm a huge Arsenal supporter, as is someone we're a big fan of, Zoran Mamdani. He's a huge Arsenal supporter as well. And ever since I've been a fan, they've got that stupid Fly Emirates on their chest. Their stadium is called Emirates Stadium, and it just breaks my heart that that's synonymous with the team that I love. It's I know why they do this, because I can't not stop watching Arsenal. For me, that's off the table, and I know that's off the table for so many people like that are fans of teams with Fly Emirates on their chest, including AC Milan, Real Madrid.
I mean, Man City is Etihad, right? That's the Etihad Stadium.
Yeah, that's the Etihad. I mean, obviously Man City is owned by the man himself. Newcastle's owned by the Saudis now. And do you have any advice for someone like me who's very torn in that, like I said, I can't not watch Arsenal. Like, I can't just say goodbye to them as a club. But, like, how do I rectify this as a fan?
I mean, I think that the thing about boycotts is that they're really hard to pull off in an effective way, and in order for them to be effective, they need to be organized and they need to pick strategic targets. This is what ultimately, after decades, helped to bring down the apartheid regime and is the deliberate strategy of the BDS movement. Right, we're boycotting various Israeli companies. Like, they don't pick every company that's involved with Israel. They pick a few strategic targets where they're like, these ones in particular, we think we can move the needle, and we're gonna try and do that. I think that Arsenal is, well, one, there is not a big campaign, as far as I'm aware, not a big campaign against the UAE specifically, and that Arsenal is probably not the target of that in the short term, in part because it wouldn't be effective, because people do care so much about football and sport in particular.
I think that would be alienation, right? Like, if you draw the line and say you're either like with us in this boycott or you're with your team you've supported since you were a kid, right? Like, there's gonna be, that's where you push people away from your movement, right? And that's why they targeted these teams, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That said, when sports is effectively targeted, that can be very effective. Like, the role of South Africa being banned from international rugby tournaments in bringing down the apartheid regime should not be underestimated. Like, that was more than the oppression. I think a lot of South Africans were sick of not being able to play rugby, you know, like in a lot of cases.
Yeah, true.
And you see this in particular with what really gets people up in arms, like around Maccabi Haifa traveling around recently with Aston Villa, where they were not to be allowed in the stadium, for example, after what happened in Amsterdam last year.
With a club like Arsenal, and there are several other clubs like this in Europe, where despite being a big world club, they are very community oriented and they do a lot of good in the community. And there's a clear separation between like the corporate ownership of the team and like the supporters that have been supporting for generations, and that they've been sort of a forefront in acceptance of like LGBTQ communities in North London and different spaces like that. Always been a refuge for immigrant communities and places where people can connect. So it just is a very hard subject to address, right?
Yeah.
But they haven't just invested in football. They've invested heavily in Formula One. There's the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. There's like the UAE cycling team Emirates. Live Golf was funded by their ally Saudi Arabia, but UAE is a major host for Live Golf. And then this was kind of during COVID as well. The UFC did like half of their fights from Abu Dhabi on a place called Fight Island, which still goes on. And I think part of it, like one thing is merchandise. Like, I'm pretty cognizant now to like, if I am buying an Arsenal thing, I don't want to buy something that has the Emirates logo on it. Hard to do if you're buying an authentic kit, but like there's jackets that either have it or don't. I'm like, okay, I'm going for the one that doesn't for sure. But it's tough. There has to be that mobilization, because if it's just you saying, I'm not going to watch this anymore, then you just end up miserable and nothing changes, right?
Yeah. So don't try and go it alone, I guess.
Good advice. There's been cultural and media washing as well. I don't know if you know about the Louvre and Abu Dhabi and their partnership. No. There's like Louvre Museum in Abu Dhabi that's like provides some legitimacy culturally to this regime, right? They have massive investment in art galleries around the world as well. And they're trying to build a media empire that sort of rivals what Qatar has right now. Be on the lookout for that. Here's something that I didn't see in a lot of like articles, but that I have noticed in my work, is that there is a sort of education washing as well. There are several universities with satellite campuses in the UAE, most notably NYU, like New York University. They have an Abu Dhabi campus. This is not just like a building they rent that, you know, it's not like a study abroad thing. It's like you can go receive a full NYU bachelor's degree in Abu Dhabi. Also,
interesting.
Sorbonne University. Do you know this one in France?
Yeah. It's it's weird because the University of Paris was called the Sorbonne, and then it was split into a bunch of different universities, and this is one of them.
Well, one of them that was split is Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi.
Right.
There's University of Wollongong, Dubai, which is an Australian university. University of Exeter, Dubai, from the UK. Rochester Institute of Technology, Dubai, from the US. And then Middlesex University, Dubai, as well. So those are all satellite campuses that exist in the UAE. There's also high-profile education partnerships. Like the Harvard Kennedy School has a long-standing partnership with the UAE government for executive education and leadership programs. And this one's particularly contentious as it directly involves training Emirati public officials from Harvard.
Oh, interesting.
And MIT also has various collaborations, notably the MIT Masdar Institute. And Columbia University has many Emirati stakeholders through their Amman Global Center in Jordan.
I guess these institutions do carry some weight, some prestige, right? Like especially, NYU, the Sorbonne. These are names that make you think of, well, part of that like luxury elite sphere, right?
True. I guess that one, those are more targeted campaigns, which I think I have seen pop up from time to time. But I think jumping on those calls when they do happen, when people are saying to NYU or Sorbonne that, like, why are you here? Side note, this week there's been a lot of news about Prince Andrew from the UK getting stripped of his titles, which is basically the royal family admitting guilt.
Yeah.
The side note is that he has been offered a home in the UAE if he wants it from the Emirati royals.
Well, I mean, as Hassan Piker points out, like the ruling class do have class consciousness.
Yeah, they do. They do completely. And it's hard for me to end this episode with a call to action necessarily, because as we pointed out, a boycott requires collective action. It requires us to target specific brands. I mean, I personally wouldn't fly Emirates or Etihad. I would never visit Dubai. I already hate Man City for different reasons. So, I think the main thing we can do is educate and disrupt, right? I think, as Adam pointed out, make Dubai cringe, essentially, because that goes against their whole plan. And I think the point of this episode was not to change everything. We're not going to fix it ourselves, but it's just having this conversation and educating maybe one person even that didn't know that the UAE had their hands in all of these pots around North Africa and across the Middle East, just to show that there's a big game behind the luxury and a strategy they've been working on. And part of that strategy is to remain in the shadows. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, Dubai is an affront to nature and to God. It has no reason to exist in the place that it does. It is a desert and should not support these buildings. I think that adds to the uncanniness. It sucks.
Well put. Well put, Adam. To kind of summarize what we've talked about this episode, the blood in Sudan can be seen from space. The weapons that have spilled it have British serial numbers. The man who authorized them owns a football team we cheer for. Well, I don't, but other people do. This isn't a distant conflict. It's a system we fund with our vacations, our flights, our fandom. They have unlimited cash, but we have a choice. We can choose not to be complicit, and we can choose to stand against the Emirati Empire. It's a fight for a world where human rights are more than a broken promise. And it starts with our very next decisions. So, Adam, thank you for potting with me. And dear listener, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend that you think needs to know that Dubai sucks. I don't have a quote for you, but can you just say loud and proud that Dubai sucks?
Yeah, Dubai sucks. Thanks for potting with me, Sam. See you next time.